Hello again, friends. And you are my friends. And you are our friends. I got to include Jim, I guess, in the opening here. Welcome to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru.
Why include Jim in the opening since it's my fucking show?
Well, you're the co-host.
It's a show that's all about me, Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, Corny's Drive-Thru, as we're affectionately known. And you just fucking first you gloss over me. Don't even collectively include me in being friends with these fucking people. Secondly, then you fucking back up and go, well, everybody, why even mention him? Well, it's only because it's my fucking show. Even if you are, as we have established, the host of this fucking fiasco. Just continue on. I'll be over here.
I'm your host, the great Brian Last, and welcome to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, where we answer your questions that are sent in many, many, many times to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com or on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru. But without any further ado, he's been quiet so far. Let's go to Mr. Jim Cornette.
Now with improved audio, if it is improved, I don't know whether to lean in here. I don't know whether to back up, see with this new apparatus. My movements have been somewhat restricted. I told you I've had to reorganize my desk area. I tell you, I'm in rough shape. Anyway, we got the bustling business online going on at jimcornette.com. I've got the dates coming up on the Midnight Express 35th anniversary tour all over the Southeast, where it requires separate PR and separate preparations. Told the people on the experience last week about the big event in Waynesboro, Virginia on February 23rd at the Waynesboro High School. I'll be there for AWE Wrestling because I'm going to interview Ricky and Robert, the Rock and Roll Express, WWE Hall of Famers, former NWA world champions, right there live in the ring, and then have sanctioned, since they are the what do you call when you've retired with the championship? The Smoky Mountain Wrestling Tag Team Champions retired.
That's the way Kevin Von Erich put it in that commercial.
Yes, if you want to fly one way to fucking Thailand or Bangkok or one night in Bangkok with Murray Head or whatever the fuck you want to have. But anyway, so they're not only they're going to risk the Smoky Mountain Tag Team Championship against the Faces of Fear, obviously, who are Barbarian and Ming. So that's a big event we announced. And then, of course, C2E2. People are already buying tickets. We may need a tiny Earl. We may need a tiny Earl from you.
I think we have one.
Do we have one? If there's one on my site, you can go to jimcornette.com and click on events, folks, and go to the C2E2 portion, which is March 22nd through March 24th. And there's a link specifically right to buy tickets to the Have a Beef with Jim Cornette live Jim Cornette Experience stand-up meltdown.
Would you like me to give the link?
Do that, please.
tinyurl.com/corny in Chicago.
Well, that's kind of a pedestrian title, but I guess it'll do.
Thank you.
What about Beefy Corny or something like that? But anyway, no, I'm going to be Corny Beefy. All right. Anyway, I'm going to be in Chicago. I'm slappy. I'll tell you why later. Going to be in Chicago March 22nd through the 24th at C2E2, which is the biggest Midwest pop culture phenomenon, convention, happening, whatever the fuck they call it on the internet, in the world today. But on Saturday night, March 23rd, there's going to be an all VIP. Everybody comes to this thing is a very important person. VIP hangout have a beef with Jim Cornette. We're going to not only do a live stand-up meltdown and Q&A with the audience, interaction, participation, the social intercourse. I'm going to have intercourse with the entire audience that night, but also a free photo op with you and I, not the Rick James song, but the fan in question and I, a free signed color 8x10 on heavy cardstock, and also an Italian beef sandwich. And it's like a 3-hour just bullshit session. So that's going to be fun. Competitively priced, and you can click on that link or go to, what was it again?
tinyurl.com/beefycorny. No, don't use that one. No. tinyurl.com/corny in Chicago.
See, now everybody's confused. We'll talk about this more later. But anyway, I've made that announcement this past week. There's another live appearance I'm going to be doing, ladies and gentlemen, in the spring that will also be broadcast on a platform. That will be announced soon. We're doing 2 podcasts a week. Like I said, the online business, the setting up the tour dates, it's going to be a busy spring, but I'm frazzled over the weekend. I've had technology. I'm telling you, it's going to be the decline of modern civilization. We got all these fine modern conveniences, but they never work like they're supposed to work. The hot tub repairman is my new best friend. Haven't had any water in it since December 15th because it sprung a leak. But after the holidays, he finally got the parts. He came, he fixed the hot tub. And the next day, the hot tub's leaking again. So he comes back out. And he says, I know what'll do this and what'll fix this. There is a special stop leak for hot tubs. That'll take care of it. I said, have you got some? He said, no, but I can bring some tomorrow. He comes back the next day. He pours it in there. Knocking on wood, it's been 48 hours. There has been a little seepage from where I believe water may have been trapped in there to begin with, but no new leakage. So we sound like we're talking about Boland's health. But so hopefully that is rectified, because we had the tow truck here the other day to tow Stacy's car to the dealership. I won't mention any names right now. But Ford Focus may become Ford Fuck You.
Wow.
Because I have a Black Beauty. I've got almost 300,000 miles on this vehicle, right? And knock on wood, everything's been lovely. But a Ford Focus with 1/10 of the amount of mileage on it, I've got recall letter after recall letter. And this December, just the week before Christmas, get one of these letters. Your car may do this. Had the car for 6 years now, right? Your car may do this. Within 14 fucking days, the prophecy comes true. And the car does this.
Wow.
And it was last seen hooked up on the back of a tow truck headed toward the aforementioned unnamed dealer until they rectify all these. Or they may be named possibly in some type of action. Some type of legal action, perhaps.
Beyond Ford Fuck You, they'll be named.
I wonder who could help me in legal action against a major corporation. Would you have any ideas, any thought process behind who might be able to assist a little guy like me in railing against this, in Don Quixoting against the windmills and fighting the system to gain what's rightfully mine? Who could possibly support me in this quest for justice and integrity and fairness and compensation?
I'm not sure. Are we going to talk more about your car? I want to know more about the car.
Oh, God damn it. Every week you jump the segue and you give me an early segue and I hand you this one on a silver platter. And what do you give me back? You give me bupkis. Bupkis is a word for nothing, and that's what you get from me. Bupkis.
Well, believe it or not, in society today, even bupkis is something you could sue for. And I actually know the perfect guy to call about bupkis.
Friends, have you been wronged? Have you been wronged? Has someone in society dealt your family or you an unjustified blow? Well, you can get justice in a court of law with this champion, this crusader, this white knight in shining armor, abreast a steed of fire. Stephen P. New and the law offices of Stephen P. New, which conveniently are named newlawoffice.com. 888-692-8084. All levity aside, Stephen has been doing a tremendous job, especially with the cases from mesothelioma and the tainted baby powder, as well as the opioid crisis, which he's done a lot for in the state of West Virginia, not only for folks who have been wrongfully addicted to this stuff by these pill mills and crooked doctors, but also the opioid addicted children who, through no fault of their own, because of all the various reasons we've talked about, were failed by the system. Stephen P. New is getting even, because you can get even with Stephen. And if you need to sue, call Stephen P. New. But he's doing a public service as well, and you need to jump on the new law office bandwagon to make sure that you are not left at the station. However, if you do jump on Stephen P. News wagon, do not be caught dragging your feet, ladies and gentlemen. Newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084.
You know, if someone jumps on your wagon without permission, that is grounds to sue, and I know the perfect person to call.
Do we have any questions?
Oh, we've got questions. We've got questions.
I've got a few questions about decisions I've made previously.
Well, before we get there, let's answer some of these questions. This first one, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Steve Campbell in Brisbane, Australia. It was on one of your fine podcasts, or the 605, where it was mentioned a while back that Ole Anderson came to the ring using the song America by Neil Diamond.
What?
I don't remember that.
What?
I just can't picture that. I take it he was facing a foreign heel at the time. I've also heard that Abdullah the Butcher at various points in Canada used Eye of the Tiger and Fat Bottom Girls. Do you know if this is true, and any other entrance themes over the years that made you go, what the fuck?
Oh, goddamn. I mean, it's very possible that Ole could have come to the ring at that, because this was the pioneer days, ladies and gentlemen, of entrance music to begin with. Even in the early 80s, and some cases in the mid 80s, only the main event guys or some of the guys, you know, the preliminary matches still wandered out to their own fucking devices and stood or fell on their own merits, as the saying goes. But then sometimes it could be up to I can see Ole saying, I don't give a fuck what you play me out to. You know, it could have been up to the sound guy. It could have been up to the guy at the building. What do we got? Do we have a cassette tape? I remember one night in World Class, just to fuck with Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, because you still use cassette tapes in those days. And I mean, the guys would usually carry their own in their bag. This is how primitive it was, right? Well, if you want to go out to music, then you're going to have to bring me the fucking music, you know, that type of shit, right? So they actually had their music on Eliminator, the ZZ Top album, Sharp Dressed Men.
Yeah.
Okay, also Legs was on there too, right?
Yeah.
So I fucking snuck over there, rewound their tape, and one night at one of the spot shows, they came out and she's got legs. Just good, you know, shit like that happened. There's no way to, and in some of the foreign countries, I mean, my God, you know, and Canada counts as a foreign country. You never knew what the fuck they might be playing. I don't know. I have no way to explain that.
Do you remember the first time you saw a CD being used to play the music?
I don't remember the specific first time, but it was, well, we used cassettes in Smoky Mountain. We used CDs in the truck, finally, in the TV truck, but we used cassettes to Mark Curtis, Brian Hildebrand, carried the cassette box around because most of the time, especially when we were in these school gyms, we were playing the music with a microphone stuck to the boombox, like I used to do it in Louisville or Evansville or anywhere I announced in those days. They didn't wire this shit through the fucking building back in those days, and some of the buildings weren't wireable. It was probably in the WWF when I saw them starting to use CDs by that point. Anyway, I digress. What was the point?
There was no point.
Very, very good.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Carlos Luis. I'm a longtime fan of the Drive-Thru, and I couldn't find the words to describe, so here's a pic about my question, and attached, Jim, is a picture. It's a cartoon of Jimmy Valiant laying under a glass table while a woman seems to be about to defecate on the glass table, and Ricky Morton is vomiting while Robert Gibson smiles. So I guess the question is about this story and the veracity of it.
I have seen that somewhere on the internet, and I've heard there is actually and I don't want to encourage people to seek it out because but there's somebody somewhere compiled a list of like this 1,000 unsavory or scandalous or licentious or whatever stories about wrestling and wrestlers that have been repeated over the years. And And I actually, a year or two ago, somebody sent me a link to it. I started looking at it, and some were true things that everybody's acknowledged were true. Others, I don't know where the fuck this shit came from. Others, there was, it was one of those deals where, yes, it was true that Bill knew Ted, but, the rest of it was bullshit. But that is amongst it. I don't know where I've heard this story repeated. I don't know where it comes from. All I know is 35 years ago when all these people were together, I never heard it, but I've heard it in the last 5 years. So I don't know where this stuff comes from, but now there are some stories about Klondike Bill in a glass coffee table that have been circulated and have more than a grain of truth to them. But I've not heard of Jimmy Valiant and or the Rock and Roll Express being involved in a glass table that was a verifiable incident. I don't know where this story comes from. I'd have to have more details.
Without knowing the details, I would assume a Ricky Morton shoot interview. It just would be my guess right there.
Well, and see, then you need some corroboration, even if you've got that. I jest. And we're going to have Ricky on sometime soon coming up about this big Smoky Mountain Tag title match. But I'll tell you, in a possibly related vein, actually, that wouldn't even be proper terminology. In a possibly related colon, there was a story when in the mid 90s, when Dutch Mantell was in the WWF. And so was Bradshaw had just got there. And I think Bob Holly was there, et cetera, et cetera. There was a number of folks that was on a tour, a European tour. And one of the places they found themselves in was fucking Germany. And one of the places in Germany they found themselves in was an adult store, which I guess back then was limited to books and videos since there was really no internet or whatever the fuck. So it was an adult book and video store, and they had the little play. You could go in and sit down and watch the samples of the fine films that they featured there. And so they all go in and sit down, and I can't remember exactly which one of the three that it was, so I'm not gonna paint anyone with this brush, but it was one of the three when they all went in and sat down in different zabadas. The one got a pretty good movie, and the second one got a pretty good movie, but they heard the third one, and he busted out of the fucking curtain. He's the one that got the shit-eating videos, and he really did go to Europe right there. He went to Europe. That's what an old friend of mine used to call getting sick, going to Europe. Yeah. So I apologize for our fine friends in the United Kingdom and parts thereof.
Two things here. One, I got a porno booth story now I have to share because of this.
Well, I'm sure you do, but do
you remember Frank Idavia, Fat Frank, the guy who ran Jersey All-Pro? He passed away several years back.
Yeah, yes, I do remember the gentleman.
We ran in similar circles, like in the mid-90s, like the whole New York underground independent wrestling scene and, the hotline scene. And I heard this story from somebody.
Oh, that hotline scene I heard was wild.
Oh, it really was. Lawsuits and everything. People went to jail over that hotline scene. It was actually pretty nuts. But I know someone who was there with him. One time they went to Show World in Times Square, which is, I think, gone now. And he was in one of those booths. You put a quarter in and the thing goes up and the girl's in front of you doing whatever she's doing. Probably not eating shit, but something sexual. And he ran out of quarters and he put his arm underneath to stop the thing from coming down. And his arm got caught. They had to call the fire department and get the jaws of life to get him out of the porno booth. But what I wanted to say also is that list. I've seen that too, like the 1,000 scandalous wrestling tales. I always wondered how true some of that stuff is because one of my stories is on there. I don't know how it got on there because it's a story I told maybe 2 or 3 people in the 90s. But the story about Tommy Rich pitching quarters into a vending machine while bobbing back and forth because he may have had a few too many drinks. That was me. I saw that at the Holiday Inn in Cherry Hill at one of Dennis's shows for the Eddie Gilbert Memorial. I was going back to my hotel room. I turned down the hallway. There's Tommy Rich just trying to throw quarters into the vending machine.
Wait, throw into the coin slot?
Yes. He's standing about 5 feet back, moving back and forth. He's obviously having a little bit of a time trying to stabilize himself. And he's pitching quarters, trying to get him into the slot.
Well, that's a game they used to play down in Georgia.
I guess so. Well, let's see. Let's get another question here, Jim. This one was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Mike Schultz. There is a funny family story that I would like to share that happened at the Evansville Coliseum, either before I was born or when I was very young. My grandparents, Mama and Papa, took my older sister to the Coliseum for wrestling. During a tag team match, my Mama, I guess that's how you pronounce it, Mammaw.
Mama. His grandmother.
My grandmother, I'll use grandmother, threw her soft drink at Jola Duke. Security came over and said she had to leave. She turned to my Papa and said, well, aren't you coming?
Papa. Well, God, you're so northern.
Well, I guess so. And said, well, aren't you coming? To which he replied, I didn't get kicked out. You did.
Yeah.
My grandmother spent the rest of the show outside in the car. When I first heard this story, I asked why she threw her Coke on Jola Duke. Her reply was, because he wouldn't tag Bill Dundee. My question is, can you estimate what year this may have been based on Jola Duke apparently turning on Bill Dundee? I don't know if there was a turn or not, but if so, would you have been there to witness this event? Was my grandmother justified?
Well, Mama may be slightly off, although it could have been a thing they just did that night. And I would estimate the year was 1978. It was Jola Duke's first run here, and I would, because if it was the 84 run, Dundee wouldn't have been here. He would have been in Mid-South. I would also say that either Mama was mistaken and that it was a tag team match or a match involving Bill Dundee. I don't remember them ever switching him babyface just so they could switch him heel back by not tagging Bill Dundee. So there's some missing details here, but I can believe that Jola Duke was wrestling against Bill Dundee in 1978 in the Evansville Coliseum, and his Mama threw a Coke on him. And I can also believe that his grandfather wouldn't leave, but at least if it was LeDuc, it was the main event. So she didn't have to sit out there very long.
Did LeDuc ever have any kind of run at all in Memphis where he was a babyface? Even a small one?
I think he was a special partner maybe once. And see, that's like a minutia that Mark James would have to run down. But I believe he may have been special partner in the couple of days when like Randy Savage was in, and he might have teamed up with Lawler as the the team of former enemies or whatever, but he never had any type of sustained babyface run in Memphis like he did in Knoxville.
And Florida.
Well, he did it several, and Montreal for that matter. He did it. He was apparently a really good fucking babyface. Of course, he was tailor-made for Montreal because he was French-Canadian, spoke French, and and a lumberjack, my God. But he was a good babyface in Florida and other places. So he could work, and he was so believable at whatever he was fucking doing. It's just that actually maybe the reason why he was so effective in Memphis as a heel, that run with Lawler, but then he didn't really come back for anything but guest shots after that until like in 1984 or so. He was in for a little while, but by then he was almost ready to retire.
We were talking about LeDuc a little bit with Ron Fuller on the Studcast recently, and I forget how it came up exactly, but he talked about a night in Southeastern where he wrestled Jacques Rougeau, and Jacques Rougeau came back from the match crying because he had gotten beaten so bad by Jola Duke. So I figured maybe there was some family heat from Montreal, but it got to a bigger discussion about Jacques Rougeau.
I don't know. It could have, with Jacques Rougeau, it could have just been heat from that fucking night.
Well, that was going to be my question.
He could piss you off at any given point, I'm sure. Well,
based on what Ron was telling me about Jacques Rougeau's reception in Southeastern, how did he get over in the locker room in Memphis?
Oh, my God. And Jacques a very successful retired businessman / celebrity up there in Quebec now, so I'm sure he won't mind that I share this small bit of his embarrassingness in his rookie years, but he just didn't fit Tennessee. He came in and he was French Canadian, and French Canadians have a natural air about them or manner of speaking or whatever that it's natural to them and just irritates the fuck most, especially out of Southern people. But Jacques came in with aspirations of being a top babyface, I believe. And he had it in his bloodlines. He's, offspring of huge stars in wrestling in Canada. But I remember the quote, and I don't know if it was somebody in a car, but the story was told in the locker room, that apparently Lawler's driving to fucking Nashville from Memphis one night, and he's got Jacques Rougeau in the car with him and somebody else. Lawler, not only at this point, is not only the booker, but he's the owner of the fucking part owner of the territory. And the subject came up of turning Jacques heel, right? Because he had he was not going to appeal to the people in the South when they had baby faces like Terry Taylor and all the baby faces they had, right? That were at the time the Rock and Roll Express, the fabulous ones, Jerry Lawler, Dutch Mantell, etc. Dundee, I think, was still a baby face at that point. So they start talking about turning Rougeau heel, and Rougeau looks at Lawler and says, "What's the matter, big boy? You afraid I get over you? Meaning if you leave me a baby face, I'll be a bigger star than you are." Well, fuck. If that was it, the next week, he was not only a heel, he was underneath fucking heel. He was, and that's when he wanted to come out to music, as we just talked about coincidentally a few minutes ago. Not everybody got music. There was the top guys got the Fabs, Lawler, whatever, they got music. So fucking Jacques, when they switch him heel, he gets the biggest boom box that he can find at the time. And Dirty Laundry was hot. Don Henley. It was like 83, that time period. He gets the fucking boom box and puts it on his shoulder and plays his own music when he's going out to the ring in like the Louisville Gardens. It's a 6,000 seat arena. He's got that boom box turned all the way up. I'm sure it fried his fucking brains. But that got even more heat with the fans and the office, right? So that became his gimmick. They wouldn't play music for him. He'd play it on his own fucking boombox, right? Rock and roll Jacques Rougeau. And it was... and so anyway, and then, and then he was gone.
Well, our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Pete Boyle. While it seems like Gene Okerlund and yourself never worked at the same promotion at the same time, did you have any sort of interactions with him?
Well, yes, and we did a couple of interviews in the WWF at... I don't know what the circumstances were of when Gene left and went to WCW, but I assume it was monetary, right? Do you know anything more about that? Well, nevertheless, it was like when I first came in and had first worked for the WWF, when I'd never worked for Vern, when Gene worked for Vern, and I'd never been to Vince all through the 80s. And Gene had never left Vince all through the 80s. And then finally, and the same thing with Bobby Heenan. And right when I got there, I did a couple of interviews, which I've seen clips of. People have tweeted a couple of clips of with Gene and a couple of interviews with Bobby. And then they both went to the place that I'd been for most of the last 10 fucking years. And then we were away for each other, for most of that time. And then I was only got a chance to just, see him at a couple of events, the Legends events or Fan Fests or whatever, after WCW closed down. So, he was a nice guy, but we never really did spend. I've heard more Gene stories from Bobby Heenan than I have actually Gene Okerlund stories. That type of thing. We never really spent a lot of time around each other.
So many people focus on Heenan's relationship with Monsoon. How would you compare, based on your conversations with Bobby, his relationship with Gene Okerlund?
Well, he loved Gorilla like a brother, and they worked together closely for so long. But he always put Gene's shit over to me and admired him, because I think he spent a lot of time there with him in the AWA, and that group. Gene Okerlund interviewing Bobby Heenan. Or, Gene Okerlund interviewing Mad Dog Vachon and the Crusher, Mad Dog Vachon and the Crusher having verbal battles with Bobby Heenan. That they've had a shitty TV show, as modern day tape has pointed out, as far as their quality of their matches. But the promos were what sold the whole company. They were the best in wrestling in some cases at the time.
Our next question, Jim, is from Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from The Original. How well did Jim do?
Oh, I thought it was the original what?
It actually is the original ... So we're supposed to fill in the blanks.
Fill in the blanks. Yeah.
How well did Jim?
Wait a minute. I had Chick Donovan. One time in Memphis, Chick was way out there, boy. He had the talking dog, right? You know, he fucking grabbed a guy. And a guy grabbed a headlock on him and he went to shoot him off, and Chick was the heel. He's going to call the spot. He's shooting the guy off. He says, "One tackle, you finish it." And shoots the fucking guy off. You finish it. What the fuck? The guy's come off. I'm going to tackle you, and then what? What the fuck? Anyway, it just came up that way.
How well did Jim do with the ladies as a heel manager? He has mentioned how he was worried being bald would hurt his pussy game. It doesn't seem like being hated so much would be a good way of getting women.
Well, that was tongue-in-cheek. Is the statement that I made when they shaved my head bald. That's because I was such a pussy magnet. I was afraid that I was kind of tongue in cheek, but let me just say this about that without going into further detail in this day and age. The amount of women who liked the heels better than the baby faces was a fraction of the amount of people, the women that liked the baby faces. But all those women that liked the heels, even though there were just a small number of them, were infinitely more fun than the women that liked the baby faces.
Okay. Our next question, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from a big fan. Oh, actually, it says his name. Hello, my name is Lyford K. Wolf Sashi from the Bahamas.
Wait, what?
Lyford K. Wolf Sashi from the Bahamas. I've noticed in WWE tag team matches that the babyface team is always to the left of the hard camera, and the heel team is always to the right of the hard camera. I was wondering if there was a reason for this. Is this just a WWE thing, or is this practiced across all wrestling promotions? How do you decide who gets which corner in a face versus face or heel versus heel match? And how do you decide for matches that are neutral, like a Raw versus SmackDown Survivor Series?
Well, good question, Lampshade K. Fuckwad from, I don't know what is that.
The Bahamas.
From the Bahamas. Okay, I'm sorry. You took the time to send this question in, and I just basically called you a glob of sperm, and I apologize. Well, yes, it's WWF Television Policy. I don't know what they do in the house shows, but obviously if it's consistent on WWE TV, it's because it's a policy. It's not industry-wide because then, especially when Impact was using the six-sided ring, well, what would you have done then? That would have just thrown the whole thing into chaos. People wouldn't have been able to have a fucking match. The best way that I can illustrate this is that when you went to the arena in the old days, if you went to a building that ran regularly, like the Charlotte Coliseum or the Louisville Gardens or the Memphis Mid-South Coliseum or the Omni in Atlanta, or just all the dozens and dozens and hundreds of buildings that each territory ran regularly, there was always, almost universally, always an entranceway that the baby faces came out of and another one that the heels came out of. Even if it was on the other side of a stage at the end of the building, the middle aisle is new. I hope everybody knows that. The middle aisle is new. It's a takeoff on the WWF's expansion of television production. In the arenas in the old days for decades and eons, baby faces came down one aisle out of one door entrance, heels came out of the other one. And then the ring was always set up in the building in the same place every week or every month or however often they ran. And there was a babyface corner and a heel corner. And that was not only subliminally, you were telling people that these guys are so fucking mad at each other that they obviously can't be in the same locker room, so they are dressing in a different part of the building. And it wasn't just subliminal. They were actually told that on television angles. But you saw them come out of different places, and you saw them occupy the same space. Some fans like to be behind the heel corner, not necessarily because they like the heels, but because they can throw stuff and have a better chance of accuracy at fucking drilling you in the back of the head or whatever. But that's so that even the new fans that had come live for the first time would see, okay, not only do I pick up on this because whoever comes out of the door on the right, we're supposed to boo, and on the left, we're supposed to cheer for, but then it's the same kind of thing in the ring. It was very easy and simple to understand. And in case of a fucking heel versus heel match, then it was very odd. But you know that one of the heels would have to be in the babyface corner, and that would just be thrilling because that was something different. Oh, look, he's over here. It was a big deal. And there were seldom babyface versus babyface tag team matches, so you never really had to worry about it.
Did you like when WCW started using the big ramp, which went from, you know, the backstage area right to the ring?
No, I fucking hated it. And I shed blood over it. That was at Halloween Havoc, having a ramp causing us to do our chase spot with Ricky Morton in a different direction, along with their fucking slow-ass cameramen that were always on the wrong place at the wrong time, caused me to stand up straight about 2 seconds late, which caused Bobby Eaton's shoulder to fucking bust my chin open when he ran into me and ran me over and gave me whiplash because I was late getting in the fucking ring. I hated that ramp. You couldn't get around the fucking ring. It was just, it was bullshit. They were just trying to copy WWF or whatever the fuck. And I know they loved the ramp in Toronto. It was an institution there, but I wasn't a fan of the ramp.
Whose decision was it in WCW? Was it a Herd thing?
Well, of course. Oh, it'll look big league now. You know, we're going to have these goddamn green muscle heads in the fucking, on the pay-per-view matches when they can't even grab a headlock. But look, we got a ramp.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Joel Nations. Mr. Cornette, my first shows were in the Greenville Memorial Auditorium ringside, and the Midnight Express were wrestling the Rock and Roll Express, and Sweet Stan was thrown over the guardrail at my feet. My question is, how would you rate Greenville as a wrestling town?
Okay, we took a sharp turn to the left there right at the end of it. Greenville was fucking great. Here, once again, it was one of the jewels of the old Crockett territory, the Mid-Atlantic Wrestling Territory. Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina was even though it's a small market by, you know, the Chicago and New York standards, it was a great market for wrestling because not only could you run Greenville every Monday night, 52 times a year, but also you could run spot shows in Spartanburg at the Memorial Auditorium or TV tapings in Spartanburg, as many people have seen. So until probably about 1986, 87, when they stopped running Greenville every week, it just, they had just way more towns. They would run just Greenville, Spartanburg, which is 30 miles apart from one another, up to 60 times a year. And that's when, and Spartanburg's only 80 miles from Charlotte. Greenville's only 110 miles from Charlotte. Greenville and Spartanburg both only 60 miles or so from Asheville, North Carolina, that they, in the old days, ran nearly weekly and were still running, once or twice a month through the mid-'80s. It was just a tremendous wrestling area, that whole, part of the country. Greenville Memorial Auditorium was the railing that Sweet Stan got dumped over, was the railing that we used around our ring in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. The red metal railing that you see on all the TV tapings, we used at all the house shows. That came from the Memorial Auditorium because we stored our Smoky Mountain ring. Sandy Scott was great friends with the manager of the auditorium down there. And our first ring guy lived in the Greenville Spartanburg market. So we stored our Smoky Mountain Wrestling ring down there at the auditorium for the first 6 months, and they let us have, because they weren't using it anymore, they let us have their railing. We repainted it our colors, but that was the old Crockett railing. That was a TV market that we constantly tried to get into with Smoky Mountain. That was intended to be the old Crockett market that would have brought the old Southeastern and the old Crockett territories together, but we could never get the fucking television. We had that building ready to go, and Spartanburg, Sandy was friends with those folks also. We just couldn't get good television in the market. But Greenville, South Carolina, in 1986, for 40 events, grossed $600,000 for wrestling. Sandy was the promoter and had the figures. I still have his ledger sheet where he showed me that in my files in here. It was a secondary town for Jim Crockett Promotions, a secondary town that grossed $600,000 a year for wrestling.
They don't make them like that anymore, do they?
No, they don't.
With something like Greenville, where you obviously talk about why it would have been important for you to get TV in there, if you had gone the route of buying time, if you had gone the route of, just buying the time on TV, how much would it have cost you in like 1993?
Oh, I'll tell you exactly. Upwards of $2,000 a week.
Wow. Because
at the time, and here's the thing, there were 3 television stations in the market that you wanted to be on at that point. And they split them between Asheville, Greenville, Spartanburg, because on the local cable and really because of the over-the-air signal, because the 3 cities are so close together, one was an NBC affiliate, one was a CBS affiliate, one was an ABC affiliate, and they were located in each town, one in Asheville, one in Greenville, one in Spartanburg. In the old days, Crockett had TV shows on 2, if not all 3, right? But if you had one station, you could cover the entire market. But as you'll recall, Fox Network was still very new. The Fox affiliate was like channel 40 something. I don't know. Folks down there now may know. It was a new station. It was the 4th station in the market. I think they had full cable coverage, but nobody was watching it. And even they wanted more money than we were paying to be on the NBC affiliate in Bristol, Virginia, and have a 100-mile signal in every direction. That was an emerging big television market that was underserved in terms of the number of stations, and they were selling those fucking deal of meals and infomercials hand over fist. There you have it.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Jared J. Smith. Hello, Jim. I am a huge fan, and I love your show. My question is, in Jim Crockett Promotions in 1988, why were there so many heel turns? It seems like every month somebody turned, like Mike Rotundo, Barry Windham, Ron Garvin, etc. Can you explain?
Yes, I think it basically came from the fact that business sucked the last part of 87 and first part of 88. And we had such a big roster, as we've talked about. Dusty knew over the summer the sale was coming to TBS, and he wanted to keep his position, so he was trying to get business back, and at least in what he could control, which was the booking. And he did in terms of getting the gates back up for the 88 bash, and then the few months that followed before the sale, but it was already going through anyway. But I think he was basically just saying, fuck it. These guys ain't in the place that I want them to be in. They're not in the position I want them to be in. I want to put them somewhere else so I can do something else with them. So let's just do it. And because there was a lot of guys on the roster, a lot of people started turning. And once again, I know that it's not good to do all that at once. And Dusty probably did too. But Dusty also knew that there was a fucking timeline on when somebody else was going to be running the place. And he wanted all his shit to be as polished up as it could be by the time that happened. So he probably figured, fuck it. It can't get any worse. Let's just do this shit.
The Ron Garvin heel turn was, he turned and then he was just gone pretty quickly.
And at one point I even knew, at least I think I'd heard him do something where he told his side of the story. I can't remember what it was, but it was obviously business. Maybe they didn't want to put him where he wanted to be. I don't know what it was.
From what
didn't he go to the AWA right then? Because they had ESPN?
He went to the AWA and then he went to the WWF. And from interviews I've seen with him, I don't know how it was then. You tell me. He's very, very negative to this day on Dusty as a booker.
Yeah, well, yeah. Hey, Ron's much like me. Once he gets negative on something, he doesn't change his mind a lot. But yeah, so it was something to do with what went on there.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Casey in North Carolina. As I've heard Jim say before, it's almost impossible to get nuclear heat in this day and age due to pro wrestling being exposed. I also listened to a recent episode of the Drive-Thru where you guys talked about Nature Boy Paul Lee. So I Googled him to see if there was a video of Ric Flair coining him the new Nature Boy. What came up instead was an arrest report article. Apparently, some woman pulled a gun on him after he tied up a baby face, beat him with a chair, and told her to, quote, sit her toothless self back down.
Yes.
My question is, do you think there is such a thing as too much heat?
Well, Ox Baker will tell you there is too after Cleveland that time. Yeah, there's always such a thing as too much heat, especially when people start getting shot and stabbed and things like that. And in this case, yeah, it was, but there was somewhat of a local flavor to the incident because the woman not only really liked the baby face on a personal basis, but also knew Paul personally. So, but yes, he got hers fucking fired up, and she came out of her purse with a gun, and she's banned from attending any of his events now. As a matter of fact, because of that.
Get out of here! Wow.
Yeah. Oh no. Yes. Yeah. Because it was loaded too, and I can't remember exactly why she didn't shoot, but it wasn't necessarily because she thought better of it. I think she just didn't get a chance, and somebody else was in the way.
All right. Well, our next question, Jim, was sent in.
But like I said, she knew Paul personally, and he does that to people.
Yeah, I've heard from a few listeners who I think wanted to pull a gun on him. But let's go to our next question, Jim. It was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Mr. JM. I have a quick question for Jim. Were you always angry, or did your experiences in wrestling make you angry?
Well, I'm not always angry. I'm just angry about bullshit. And no, actually, there was a time when the bullshit quotient in the business, at least for me, was relatively low, years in a row, as a matter of fact, apart from the travel, and et cetera, and the grind, but it was much more fun and much worth the exchange, much worth the bad part. It's only that it over the last number of years that it's become aggravating. So that way, you know me, Brian. Would you say I'm always angry, or just angry with righteous indignation over things that people should be angry about?
Yeah, I've always found you to be a rather happy guy. I always feel weird telling people that. I'm like, my experiences around him are always great. I've usually just seen the happy Jim Cornette, but I don't know.
Well, that's because you've never lit yourself on fire and done a diving headbutt in front of me, or, any of those things. So
that is still the
normally.
Oh,
fire hot! Oh no. Normally, I'm a very gregarious fellow with a predilection for telling ribald stories and entertaining anecdotes. But only when confronted with tomfoolery, shenanigans, and bullshittery of the highest order do I then turn into my secret alter ego of "I'll kill you, motherfucker."
Or technology.
Well, frustration can do it. But normally I'm happy-go-lucky. That was the title of a Jerry Lawler song on his album that he put out in '78. I'm happy-go-lucky, lucky in love with you. It wasn't one of his major tracks.
Clearly not, but let's get another question in here, Jim. This one was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Matt Keene. He has a couple questions here this week. When Bill Dundee left with you from Mid-South, why didn't he wrestle? Was he just too small? Did he get paid less to book than he would have to wrestle somewhere else? Did this piss him off? I'll ask this and then the second question in a moment.
But he did. Watts did not want his booker wrestling. Ernie Ladd was the booker. Ernie wasn't wrestling at that point. And also, to be quite honest, at first Watts thought Dundee was too small for the territory. But then a couple of times he got pressed into service when the Bruise Brothers were booked down from Memphis and Dream Machine had just broken his ankle. Dundee took his place, teamed up with Pork Chop. And by the end of the year, because Dundee always wanted to wrestle. Dundee loved to wrestle. I think Dundee would have wrestled for no extra money just to be wrestling because he loved wrestling and still does. That's why he still does it every once in a while. And he's a fucking physical freak. But anyway, the point I was going to make is at first Bill Watts thought that Bill Dundee was too small to wrestle in that territory. But when he saw him, then he changed his mind and he relented on it. And for a while, Bill was able to work. But he never pushed himself as a top guy. That's why I say he pushed himself as a top guy when he worked Memphis because Bill Dundee was the second biggest star at least in Memphis. Most of the time he was there. So he should have been in the main events. He just loved to wrestle. And so when he booked himself for Watts, he was on the card. But I would imagine that since Bill Watts and Mid-South Wrestling, which was a larger company that booked more major buildings than the Memphis territory, that Bill Dundee booked the record year, and the booker makes more money than most anybody in the territory. And with Mid-South and JYD, that may not have been the case, but most of the time, whatever your top guy's making, unless he's an owner, the booker makes more, or used to. I can't fathom a time when a booker would have been being paid less money than one of the guys on the card, unless it was the NWA champion or whatever. But anyway, Bill probably made more money in 1984 booking and not wrestling than he ever made a year wrestling, because it was a record business year and he booked it. So I don't think he was upset about that.
Matt's second question here this week. He's watching Memphis Wrestling from 1986 on Amazon. There's a guy doing interviews that never introduces himself, and they never give his name. He looks sort of like a young, slow Abe Lincoln. Any idea who this is? After a couple of weeks, he gets replaced by Lance Russell.
Oh, God damn it. Now, that's Randy Hales' rookie year. Yes, it was Randy, because Lance was on vacation. When Lance would be on vacation, Randy would be the one who would be the head ring announcer in Memphis, and Memphis is where they shot the local promos for all the rest of the towns. So if Lance was not there, and if for some reason or another, in the early years, Dave would do it, but then Dave didn't normally come to the matches on Monday. So since Randy was there all the time, Randy was doing that. And I think he would resent in the highest the implication that he looked like a slow Abe Lincoln.
Idol once told me, I always thought this was funny. He goes, I always thought Randy looked cool. I'm like, what? And he's like, hey, he looked like Lincoln, Abe Lincoln. And I'm like, but he was serious. He wasn't like making a joke or anything. He thought that made Randy look cool. That he looked. No,
I've always seen Quentin Tarantino with Randy. If Quentin Tarantino had been born in Jonesboro, Arkansas.
All right. Our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Charlie in Starkville, Mississippi. I was listening to an interview with Ricky Morton, and he said his biggest grossing year in the business, he only made $120,000. That really surprised me. Considering the Rock and Roll were such big draws, why did Ricky get such small payoffs?
Well, now, is that after expenses? Perhaps that was taxable income. I'm caught in a quandary here, because I know that 1986 was probably both the Midnight and the Rock and Roll's biggest year in the business. And I know what we made, and it was more than that. So I don't know, because I didn't see Riggy's checks. But it seems like it would be more than that to me, too. But, some people remember the glass half empty, and some people remember the glass half full. Now, like every time that you talked to Klondike Bill, this is why I always thought that the ultimate wrestling reality television show would have been Klondike Bill and George Bunk Harris in the ring truck for Jim Crockett Promotions. But I even said one time they get updated for the late 80s. They could be driving an intergalactic ring truck that's actually a spaceship or something. But just those two. Because if you talk to Klondike Bill, he'd be, oh, yes, I wrestled in Amarillo. Yes, Old Man Funk. Oh, he treated me so good. Always paid me well. Yes, we had a good time there. And because he had the Canadian kind of clipped little thing there, he never lost. And then when you talk to old George Bunk Harris from, Monkeytown, Tennessee somewhere, yeah, I'll tell you what, I worked for that guy. He fucked me over. Boy, I tell you, drove 150 miles there through a snowstorm, couldn't see, no heater in the car. Got there, they were sold slap dab out, people hanging from the rafters. I got so much heat, started a riot, got stabbed, and then he fucked me on the payoff. Had to drive 150 miles all the way back, ran out of gas, almost froze to death. It was just so some people remember the payoffs as not being not as good as they were, and some people remember the payoffs being even better than they were.
The glass is half empty, the glass is half full, or it's a glass table.
But fortunately, I remember exactly what they were, because I kept a record of every payoff I ever fucking got.
Well, what about Crockett Promotions and merchandise? Because obviously, I got to think the rock and roll. Oh,
well, there was none to speak of. And see, here's the thing. Now, Ricky does have a valid complaint here. The Rock and Roll Express fan club that they started and advertised on television. What was that? Late '86, early '87-ish.
Yeah.
In that time period, Ricky released the highly prized single Boogie Woogie Dance Hall.
Oh, God.
Where
awful.
he was singing, and they had the 6-foot tall life-size poster. I have one of these Rock and Roll Express fan club packages here in the vault. They had a 6-foot color poster of them. We know that they did over $1 million on the Rock and Roll Express fan club because it came out in some type of deposition somewhere. We'll just leave it at that. They took in over $1 million, and Ricky and Robert, I think, got like 21 grand a piece out of that year.
Wow.
So, which may have hastened their leaving Crockett Promotions, I think, in '87 for that time, that point. But see, they had the way that it was always told in the locker room, and I don't want to malign any members of the Crockett family. But the way that it was always told in the locker room is they didn't investigate where some of the money was going on merchandise that they were selling of some of the baby faces because they thought that it might be a member of the Crockett family until they found out that it was actually some fucking goof that they had hired that took them for a bunch of fucking money, and nobody found out until it was too late. But nevertheless, I digress. That's the story that was going around in the locker room.
Well, remember, a while back on the 605 Super Podcast, I had Judge Richard Boner on the show, and yes, that's his real name. And he, at the time, was working as a lawyer for Crockett in the late 80s. He was the guy in charge of going around and rounding up all the people bootlegging merchandise. There were people apparently selling bootleg Rock and Roll Express t-shirts at various gas stations throughout the Carolinas.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, yeah. It was the hottest thing in the Carolinas. If you've got a gas station on the corner of fucking dumb fucking Park in Oshkosh, South Carolina, the chances of anybody affiliated with Jim Crockett Promotions wandering into that location was nil, right? Or slim. But sometimes you would actually stop in these places on the way to some fucking far off spot show, and you'd walk in and you'd see these bootleg, handmade Rock and Roll Express, Magnum TA, and Dusty Rhodes shit. Because it was so fucking hot, everybody was watching the TV.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Matthew Elliott. We all know about Animal, and we love the stories you have about John, but do you have any stories of the third and much lesser-known Laurinaitis brother? Did you know or work with Mark?
Yes, the Terminator. Mark was a good kid. And actually, I don't even know when he got out of wrestling what he began doing. I would assume because he was a smart kid and et cetera that it was probably a good thing he got out of wrestling, and he's probably done something very well for himself. But he had a lot of potential. He just got there at the point where all the territories were gone. And if you weren't going to, work for the WWF or WCW, you pretty much weren't going to be on TV at that point unless you were going to, go to Memphis, and otherwise, boom. And I think he may have gone to Japan a time or two, but it didn't take or whatever. But he may have been squeezed out of the business just by there not being that many places to go. And also, since his brothers both still had some cachet, I think it was probably he might have decided, it ain't for me. But he was a good kid.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Mark Damon. You've often referred to the buttermilk run when talking about towns on the outskirts of a territory that didn't draw or make the wrestlers much money. In your opinion, what would your personal top 5 buttermilk run towns be from your time in the territories?
Oh, God. And I got that from Troy Graham, the Dream Machine, because especially sometimes he'd be in the car with me. He'd go, here we go, baby, buttermilk run, buttermilk. I mean, there's so many. As far as regular towns, I always said Houma, Louisiana was a bad place, but Laranja, Louisiana was. Somebody just tweeted a picture of it was Seth Hansen, I think. tweeted one of the ads for Laranja, the wrestling ads in like 1984, and it was using a picture of Charlie Cook that hadn't been in the territory in 6 years, right? But Laranja was definitely buttermilk run in Mid-South. Tupelo was the classic buttermilk run town in Memphis, even though, I mean, there were spot shows that they ran once and maybe never again in Memphis that I'll tell you about in a second that would beat that. But Tupelo was the regular buttermilk town in Memphis. If you were on Tupelo, there was no town that you would rather make that they would run per week less than Tupelo, Mississippi. In the Carolinas, actually, to be honest with you, Crockett had such a great setup that one of the buttermilk towns I remember, we never wanted to go to Winston-Salem because it never fucking drew. We'd go to those fucking Gaffney, South Carolina. There'd be more people in that nice building in Winston-Salem. It just never drew. But there were some towns. I still at the Dyersburg County Fair one time, we had the ring set up in a field that was 6 inches deep of, do you know the dirt that is so dry that it's basically dust? It's not sand. It's dust dirt. I was picking dust out of my crotch, my teeth for days after that. Plowboy Frazier ran a town. He wanted to run towns, and Lawler loved Frazier, right? Because Frazier entertained Lawler. He liked having him around. That's why he gave him all those gimmicks, did all that stuff. Well, Frazier wanted to run some towns down in Mississippi where nobody else was running. Northeastern Mississippi is where this was. And he said, nobody's running it, neighbor. There's a reason for that. And we went to 2 of his towns, a Friday and a Saturday night one time. I was booked with goddamn, as a matter of fact, I think it was the Bruise Brothers. Worked against him and fucking Lawler. Lawler agreed to do this because it was only like 60 miles from Memphis. It was 300 miles from me from fucking Nashville. The last 8 miles into this town, the road was not paved. This was the main road, actually the only road into this fucking town, and it was not paved. And there was a fucking gym there. I don't know what they did there under normal circumstances. It was like a tin kind of shed with basketball goals, and they had a basketball floor. There were some bleachers, but then they brought folding chairs in, and there were 200 people there. And at the time, I was not used to working in front of that few people. Most shows back then did not draw less than 200 people. The night afterwards was in a facility almost the same, and it drew half of that. That was the buttermilk run. That was when Dream was in full effect. Him and Porkchop sitting there going, buttermilk, buttermilk. But I mean, there was towns like that, but that was what originated the term outlaw mud show. At one point or another, you could have a fucking wrestling show in any place. In a vacant lot on the corner. We found it when I was doing the research for the NWA event in Nashville and looking through Scott Teal's book. Not only did Nick Goulas run every week in Nashville, there was wrestling weekly in Nashville from fucking under Goulas from 1940 through 1980. But at one time, he ran twice a week because there was opposition in town, and he wanted to burn the business out a little bit so that it would starve them out. So he was, and plus his business was hot. So he was running twice a week at one point in the 60s. In the 40s or 50s, he financed another opposition promotion to run opposition to his opposition to try to run them out of business. And the opposition promotion, even though they'd run some, and at one point Dick Lever lasted years, number of years, broke Eddie Marlin in. But the outlaw promotion would basically they were pop-up wrestling events. They not only would run regularly scheduled events at some recognized buildings, but sometimes they would just spread the word. If there was a vacant lot on the corner of 7th Avenue North and fucking Broadway or whatever, they'd get down there, set up a ring, and have matches one afternoon. And they'd let everybody watch for free, and they'd have Cokes to sell. So there was wrestling in Nashville every fucking where.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Carl Dozier. Do you have any stories about Eddie Sullivan?
No.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Zane Marjorie, or Zane Major, I guess is how you say this one. I was going through YouTube and ran across a video.
Wait, I thought it would add to the funniness of the bit if we just didn't say anything. But no, Eddie Sullivan was a old timer, a Southern old timer. Was especially over in the Alabama area. I know who he was, etc. But I never actually spent any time around him. But I don't want to downgrade his memory. He was a fine talent. I just never knew him.
This is Zane Major's question. I was going through YouTube and ran across a video about wrestling personalities that were gay. On the list was Jim Barnett. Is there any truth to this?
Well, we've never actually had it documented in court. It was, actually, Gary Juster told me that because he was close with Barnett before he died, because Barnett still lived in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta. He said that he never wrote his book because he felt that to be totally honest in the book, he would have to tell people he was gay, and he didn't want to make that revelation.
Wow.
He still, when he was about ready to pass away, still did not know that universally the one accepted fact in the wrestling business was that whether he had ever come out and admitted it or not, yes, Jim Barnett was gay. But he did not really, he thought it would be a revelation that he just didn't want to make.
Well, it's like that Pat Patterson revelation a few years back on the WWE reality show that's on their network, Legends House, I think it was, where he finally says, I'm gay, and you think like, oh, everyone in the business knew he was gay, but he never actually just came out and said it before. It was like the first time he had said it.
Yeah, well, but once again, now, Pat knew that people knew, he just hadn't really said it. But Barnett legitimately, apparently, was not under the impression that most people knew and thought it would be some kind of revelation, which may have ended up preventing us from getting the greatest wrestling book of all time if he just sat down and told everything. But no, Pat's always been aware that people knew. He just didn't, and I think as much as anything, maybe both of them were still in the mindset they didn't want to do anything to look detrimental on the business. It was still not the time for that, especially when Barnett passed away. And then Pat has come by that it's not anything bad on the business anymore. But I don't think either one of them would have wanted to do anything that would make people look sideways at the wrestling business, even though Barnett did many things. But not on purpose.
Ron Fuller told a story about when he was in Australia, Jim Barnett came into the locker room when he first got there and he said, tell me what's going on with the fart club today. And Ron's like, what's he talking about, the fart club? And Barnett said, it's fuck a rat today. The fart club. Because he was a big proponent of the guy should go out there and sleep with the fans, wasn't he?
Well, yes. And besides that, not only that, but he would actually have whoever the appointed head, rat chaser in the locker room was, give the rat report on his team meetings. Like they'd gather everybody at the Omni and he'd talk to them about business or just whatever. But he'd also, and now so-and-so, it might be Robert Fuller or whatever, will give us our rat report. Well, old Susie in Birmingham, she's disappointing us. She hadn't been showing up here lately. But Greta over in Columbus, Georgia, she's doing the best she can to take up the slack. Shit like that. He loved. That was Barnett. Any news, any scoops, any gossip?
He loved gossip. Yeah.
Gossip.
All right. Well, I think this will be our final question here this week, Jim. This was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Joe in Boston. Can Jim go into a deeper explanation of hot shot booking? How is the structure different when compared to doing regular business? Are there success stories where promotion was turned around for the long term after hot shot booking? And at what point did Jim realize Dusty had started doing it in Jim Crockett Promotions?
Good Lord, an essay question to end up with. Well, first of all, yes, every promotion at one time or another that's ever experienced a big major turnaround was probably from hot-shotting something. Everybody's done it at one point or another. The idea was don't do it too long. You can't come back. Back in the old days when the promoters were actually experienced with their product, and the talent that they employed actually knew what the fuck could go on if you did too much bullshit, they would not. Hotshot booking differentiated from regular booking in terms of you did more, quicker, you went farther, you pressed the envelope, whatever, because you had lost the plot, as they say over in England. Help me out with this. Your business is down. Maybe it's down because, talent fucking dried up, or there was a bad expose in the newspaper, or you lost the TV, or whatever the fuck of the many millions of things can happen to hurt your business. But if you still had a platform, if you've got a TV, or you still had a way that people could see the product, they just weren't buying tickets, which was your primary source of revenue, you had to heat things up. You had to do a hot angle that goes over and above the violence level, more blood, or a guy's put in a hospital, carried him out on a fucking stretcher, or bring somebody's family into it. Just bring in fucking names from the past, but it's going to cost you more money, but you're putting the pedal to the metal, a big show of some kind, whatever the fuck it may be, to try to get people to come back and see what you're doing now, since they haven't been around in a while. And if you can, through the hot shot angle, get them to come back to the live event, then hopefully you can hook them on the other shit that you're doing. But if the only thing they'll come for is when somebody literally gets hit over the head with a sledgehammer and put in a fucking hospital, and they're going to wait till the next time that happens, well, then you either got to do it 3 weeks later, or, then gradually it means nothing. So hotshot booking is always used to try to get the people back, but the talent in the whole thing was knowing when not to go too far. Too much blood. How can you top it? Or it turns the people off, or the TV station gets mad, or too much violence, or too much anything, or just too many matches. You get the people. For years, the Memphis Mid-South Coliseum had 4 or 5 matches on a card and drew 10,000 people. And Louisville Gardens, a full card, was in the early years was 3 to 5 matches. Well, fuck, by the time that they finished trying to compete in the early 80s and through a boom period of business where they could carry that many, guys on the card, by the time the business went down in the mid 80s, the people expected 6 or 8 matches on a fucking card, or it was a piece of shit. You've automatically doubled your expenses. Every time you give people way too much instead of just a little bit more, you increase expectations and make it harder to fucking follow through with. And eventually you hotshot yourself out of business because you can't follow anything with anything. Nothing makes an impact anymore. And you've immuned the people to whatever it was you were doing.
Is it hotshotting when, after Robert Fuller's booking reign, Jerry Jarrett does Tupelo, or is it not hotshotting just because he's trying to get things back to a normal level?
Well, no, it was hotshotting because he was trying to get things back. But it's always hotshotting. It's just if you hotshot and get your desired effect and then back up, he was left with a skeleton crew. Houses were down, but he still had the buildings and he had the TV, and the people were still watching the TV. So he created such a fucking stir with the 6 guys he had that he could count on, and then brought Jackie Fargo back for the first time in 2 years, and then brought Roughhouse Fargo back. And then, basically for 2 or 3 months, hot-shotted until he got the houses back and people interested. And then then Jackie Fargo wasn't on every show, and they didn't fight in the fucking concession stand every fucking week. And they quit doing the arena-wide brawls because then they were going after a championship, and it was a different style of fucking match. And he drew back on it, and he got the people back. And then, okay, he wasn't worried about trying to make it sell out every week. He was worried about trying to keep it solvent every week, and then we can build on it from here in a normal fashion. He hot-shotted 3 months over the summer.
And what about, to this question, Dusty Rhodes' run as booker for Crockett?
Well, Dusty had so many guys and so much shit going on, and everybody had multiple programs. And when we were the World Tag Team Champions, if we were in a program with the Rock and Roll Express, we could still wrestle Dusty and Magnum or the Road Warriors in a main event for the belts at any given point, and we had history with everybody. And me and Baby Doll was intertwined, and Dusty or Magnum for the U.S. title, blah blah blah. He really wasn't necessarily, to me, hot-shotting in '86 because everything was so fucking hot, and everything pretty much you did got over. Where he hot-shotted was in '88, where he threw everything out there at the Great American Bash, but it got the people back. I mean, every show had a scaffold match, every show had a street fight, every show, but it got the people back. So it kind of worked. But then he didn't really continue with hot-shotting it in '88 because Turner Broadcasting bought the thing. He was replaced. It all went to shit. So, the thing is, I don't think he was doing too much for the people in '88 or in '86 because everything was selling out and it was so entertaining and everything was getting over. He could have probably let the Horsemen get a little more heat. But otherwise than that, it wasn't really hot-shotting and it was all working.
I guess the classic example is '73 Australia when Barnett knew he was going to sell and come to Atlanta.
Oh, there you go. And especially whenever, I'm sure the Tennessee Stud could probably tell you a little something about this too. Whenever you know you're going to sell your territory, do everything you can to get the numbers as good as possible right about the time the guy's going to buy it starts looking at it.
Yeah.
That's a rule of thumb.
Yeah, it was just Mark Lewin and Big Bad John and their armies just bleeding all over the place every week until they sold, and then they were all gone.
Yeah, and then they'd bled it out. What do you follow that with? You're going to fucking cut people's heads off? I mean, now they would. I'm waiting for that. But just doing all of that in a short period of time, giving them all the violence and all the blood and all the outrageousness, you can't follow it, and people get numb to it.
Well, with that, I'm sure you're all numb to this. The drive-thru is closed. Of course, you can follow Jim on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. All episodes in the archive are available at 605pod.com for those of you who have asked. Of course, you can go to JimCornette.com and Cornette's Collectibles for t-shirts, action figures, which will be gone soon, DVDs, some of which will be gone soon. T-shirts.
Burger towels have been reordered, but they're not here yet.
Burger towels will be there soon. T-shirts will probably be constantly restocked forever. Restraining orders never go out of style, and so much more. JimCornette.com.
Stop mocking me!
Of course, you can hear us on the Jim Cornette Experience when it debuts each and every Thursday, available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast, or available at tinyurl.com/official Corny YouTube, the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. We ask you, please subscribe and check out the videos. Every episode of The Experience and the Drive-Thru, when they come out, they go up there with exclusive artwork by Travis Heckel. Check that out and subscribe. tinyurl.com/official Corny YouTube, the one and only official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Of course, if you want to sue someone for bupkis, you can call Stephen P. New. What's that number, Jim?
Well, that number is 888-692-8084. And also, don't forget, Chicagoland C2E2. It's tinyurl.com/corny in Chicago.
That's correct. But until Thursday on The Experience, for Jim...
And for Dingo and the baby...
For Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!